MJ Morris's stock is up for Maryland football.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today we are going to be talking about a little bit about the Maryland quarterback battle, which is obviously a popular topic on this show, but we haven't talked about it, I feel like, in a week or so. And so I kind of really want to dig into this because I feel like MJ Morris's stock right now to be the starting quarterback is really high right now, and you would want to buy it right now. And I think that MJ Morris is definitely going to be the starter, and I think his stock is high, and I think his stock is going up. And I think that this is a guy that I think is extremely talented. Of course, transfer from NC State, and a lot of people have different opinions on MJ Morris just because when you go through his other seasons at NC State and how he played overall, it's been up and down in terms of how it looks statistically, his throwing, everything, him as a player. It's been a little bit of up and down at NC State, but he also showed flashes of being a really good player at NC State. And you got to remember that he was a young guy coming into the Terps. Like he's still a young player, but over the couple of games that he got to play at NC State, he brings down Miami, he brings down Clemson, he does some really cool things. The thing that he has to improve on that I was never sold on when he came into Maryland was definitely throwing the ball. And not that he doesn't have a good arm, not that he doesn't have a big arm, but throwing completion percentage was always kind of low with him. Like if you look at it, 52% against Miami, 55% against Clemson, 60% against Duke, 53 against Marshall. And like, it's not like horrible, but you definitely want to see those numbers go up. But he was supposed to be the backup for a lot of last season. They brought in a guy named Armstrong who used to be at Virginia, but eventually they started playing MJ Morris, but then he didn't finish out the year, I think, because he wanted to reserve a red shirt or something. It was weird. It was a weird situation at NC State. So him coming into Maryland, there was a three-way quarterback battle, and we really didn't know how it was going to go. I think a lot of people assumed that MJ Morris was the most talented player in that room and that we brought MJ Morris in for a reason. And a lot of people were pretty hyped when we brought in MJ Morris. So the stock was pretty high up when he just got to Maryland, but it plummeted down. So when he just got to Maryland, it was all highs. Everyone was excited, even though he wasn't like one of the best quarterbacks in the transfer portal. He was definitely up there within the top 15, top 10 type of guys. And losing to Leah, everyone thought that this guy kind of coming in was going to be our next starter. But then Coach Loxley was like, this is a three-way quarterback battle, and that's what I thought it was going to be. I was almost for sure it's going to be a quarterback battle, but I still thought MJ Morris was going to be the starter. But people like me and other people, the stock felt low after a couple weeks into the spring when there was different reports coming out that he was struggling, that he wasn't playing amazing, that things weren't going well. And I said, we have to be careful with it because he's a quarterback in a new system, in a new place, learning new plays, learning a new offense that he's not used to. And it takes some time to do that. No matter how talented you are, no matter what level of football you're playing on, it takes time for a quarterback to do that. But still, there was a natural reaction to be like, I don't know if he's going to be our starter. Maybe we kind of overrated him. Maybe he's not as good. And Maryland had that open scrimmage. And the report was that Cameron Edge and Billy Edwards were getting all the first team reps during that one of those first scrimmages that they had, and that all three of those guys didn't look good, but it sounded like MJ Morris wasn't getting as many reps, that he wasn't in the best spot as a player, and that he just wasn't ready to be our guy. And it didn't seem like he was what Maryland football was going to hope that he was going to be. And he just didn't seem like he was on the level that a lot of people thought he could be. And so the stock was low for a second for MJ Morris. And it was looking like, I don't know, man, like maybe Billy Edwards or Cameron Edge could be our starter. I really made an argument that Cameron Edge has a legit argument to be our starter. And I still think that's the truth. But then the spring game came and MJ Morris won the offensive MVP and had some really nice looking balls and looked like the best quarterback out of Billy Edwards, out of Cam Edge. He looked like the best one. And he was also getting all the first team reps along with Billy Edwards. So then that kind of cut down on Cam Edge. But now a couple weeks have gone by since the spring game. And now I'm looking at it and it still feels like the MJ Morris stock is up. It sounds like MJ Morris is going to be our starter. It sounds like he's going to lead this Maryland team. And a lot of people might think that, oh, like maybe that's not the case. That's not what's going to actually happen. And a lot of people think that Billy Edwards maybe should still have an argument. But I've said it. I think that MJ Morris is the most talented out of the three. And he also has the most experience out of the three. And when you put those things together, the most talent and the most experience, then I would go ahead and say you probably have your starter right there. I'd say he probably has arguably the best arm. I would say him and Cameron Edge arguably have the two best arms in that room in terms of throwing the ball. He probably has the highest ceiling in terms of kind of some of the balls that he can throw. But on a throw-to-throw basis, Cameron Edge is a really good player. But I would say that he also has the legs, and he's not quite as explosive in running the ball to what Billy Edwards is. But in his own right, he's a really good runner of the football, and Cameron Edge doesn't have that. So he kind of combines the best of both worlds between Cameron Edge and Billy Edwards and kind of makes a quarterback right there, a guy that can throw, a guy that can run. And that's kind of what you want in college football in today's game. And I can see why people are saying that he's going to be the starter. And I would say this, like if you wanted to buy stock into MJ Morris right now and that he would be our starter later at the beginning of the season, I would try and do it now because I think that price is only going to go up higher because I think it's going to be more of a guaranteed thing that he's going to be our starter. But I'm looking at MJ Morris now and I'm saying I think that he's our guy and I think the stock is completely up and I'm kind of just waiting for Coach Loxley to announce it. I don't think they'll announce it until I guess they have a little bit of a break before they come back until they really get into things for the season and that fall football. When they get into that summer football, where they really start ramping things up and they come in early and everyone talks about the summer camp football, where you're installing everything. They're working super hard, conditioning, whatever it is. I've seen like TikToks and different things online about how hard that is. And so they're about to come in. And I think right now, Cameron Edge's stock is really low right now because I think the spring game was a huge indicator for him in terms of he didn't get any first team reps. He got plenty of the second team reps, but he didn't get any first team reps. And it was like, he doesn't seem like he's going to be our guy. And so I wouldn't think that his stock is rising at all. I think his stock is going down. And I think you could say the same thing for Billy Edwards. I think his stock is going down as well to be the starter. I think that it's pretty clear. I just think that like when you put everything together, I mean, a lot of people are going to say, I'm not ready to name MJ Morris the starter, but I kind of am. And I really doubt that it's going to go any other way. I'd be stunned if anybody was a starter. I feel like Billy Edwards' stock is about as low as it could be right now as well if you wanted to pick him to be the starter. I just think right now, where we are as a program, it looks like MJ Morris's stock is the highest out of anybody in that quarterback room, and I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily. I don't think it's a bad thing at all that he looks to be our starter next year because I think he's really talented. I think he's also come a long way, and I think Coach Loxley would tell you that too. Like I was saying, you can look at it with the stock, him coming in and it being high, and then it kind of plummeting down and going up. But if you look at it just how he came in and it took a second for him to kind of get get his legs underneath him and figure things out at Maryland and figure out the offense a little bit, but I think he started to do that. And of course, we won't completely know until the football games actually start and we really see stuff. Everything's just a report, and everyone's going to just tell you different things. But it seems like what I saw from the spring game versus what I'd heard in the fall, in the spring scrimmages, then it really sounds like he got a lot better from what I saw. Because in that spring game, he looked solid, he looked decisive, he looked like he had a good idea where he's throwing the ball, and then he also used his legs, which is going to be huge this year. The legs are going to be a bigger part of the Maryland football running game in terms of quarterback run, because you're not as worried about MJ Morris with his size at about 6'3", 6'4", a bigger dude than Talia. You're not as worried about him getting hurt, where Talia kind of feels like Bryce Young, where it's like if he gets hit, it's gonna be pretty bad. And it kind of felt like Talia was a little bit injury prone, but I feel like MJ Morris is a bigger guy in that case as well. But he also can just use his right arm as well as his legs, and I think that puts us in a pretty good spot. So I feel like the MJ Morris stock is about as high as it can be right now, and I feel like until Coach Loxley names him the starter, I feel pretty confident telling you guys that MJ Morris is going to be our starter. Who are the young building blocks on defense? We talked about who the guys are on offense that are the young building blocks, but who are the young building blocks on defense for Maryland football? I will tell you about that after this ad from eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy. It is also what keeps your ride or die alive. Superchargers, roof racks, eBay Motors has got it all. Everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. LED headlights, superchargers, roof racks, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. So I talked about last time the building blocks on Maryland football's team on the offensive side of the ball. I was originally going to do on both sides of the ball and just talk about everybody, but it went kind of long, and I named some of the guys that are the building blocks. And for to give you guys a little bit of background of what I kind of mean for building blocks for Maryland football, I mean the next set of guys that you're going to build your program around, the younger generation, the younger recruiting classes that are guys that are like, yeah, he's going to be a star for us in the next couple of years and has a couple more years of eligibility. I'm not really talking about the older established seniors. Those are the guys that are already the centerpiece of our program. But I mean, like, who are the building blocks? Who are the younger guys? Like I talked about as an older guy that, like, you wouldn't count like Ty Felton or Caden Prather at this point, or you wouldn't count like a Ruben Hippolyte. I mean the young guys. I named Dylan Wade on the offensive side of the ball because of what he's done at the tight end position this offseason and what I've heard about him, and he's only a freshman and how exciting he's going to be. I named MJ Morris as well. He still has a lot of youth that people don't realize. MJ Morris has still a good amount of college eligibility left. And so you look at him and he's a guy. I talked about Nolan Ray in that running back room who potentially could be the most explosive guy in that room, even with Roman Hemby. And I talked about some of the younger wide receivers, whether it's a Ryan Manning or some of those other guys that are in that room that are really talented younger guys. I had a hard time deciphering between like Octavian Smith and Shalik Knotts because those two guys are juniors, but I still think they're kind of building blocks for Maryland football because I think they still have a while for what they can develop into and what they can become for Maryland football. So it's all kind of interesting. It's all pretty interesting, but let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. But you guys should let me know who you guys think are building blocks for Maryland football on the defensive side of the ball. And this, I'm going to start along the defensive line because I think this kid showed out in the spring game, looked really good. He was on the second team. He was injured all of last year, but I think he has a chance to come back and be a really high-level player for Maryland football. And I know we're deep along the defensive edge group and that position group with plenty of really good players like Kellen Wyatt and Donnell Brown, and there's some really good players. Quayshawn Fuller up there that I've talked about that have a chance to make us a really good team on that defensive line and have one of the better defensive line units, I think, in the Big Ten. But I think this kid, Neo Avery, who was injured all last year, has a chance to be a building block for Maryland football. I look at him as next up along the defensive line in that edge group, and I think he's going to be an impact player for Maryland football moving forward. And I think that he has a chance to get some time this year. What I saw in the spring game was a guy that looked big. First of all, he looks a lot bigger than he was listed at originally on 247. But he's 6'5", so it's like, how small can a 6'5" defensive end guy be? But it seemed like he gained a good amount of muscle, and he just looked physically ready to play at the Big Ten level, and he was dominating the spring ball game. I was like, Neo Avery, I've been waiting to watch him. I've been waiting to see him play, and he looked really good. So if he can stay healthy for Maryland football, I think that's a kid that's a building block for Maryland football. I think the next couple of years, I think he's a guy that not this year. This year, you just might see it in flashes. You might just see it in a couple of games. But next year is going to be the year where he might come out of nowhere, and he's going to be a guy that we're like, whoa. This kid's talented. This kid is next up for Maryland football, and you need those kind of guys along the defensive side of the ball and the defensive end group, because a lot of those guys are guys that are going to create pressure, and you need pressure on the quarterback and to stop the run. That's one of the biggest things in college football. How much can you stop guys? How much pressure can you put on the quarterback? How good are you up front? I've said it. That's the difference between us and some of these really good schools like Michigan, Ohio State. And a lot of it comes down to up front. So I think he's going to be a really high impact player down the road for Maryland football. Another guy that I think moving to the secondary is Braden Lee, the cornerback, who was a 4-star for a while, switched from South Carolina to Maryland, really good kid, is expected to maybe see some time this year. I think Braden, he's got some twitchiness, he's got some athleticism, some speed that you don't always see. Braden had every offer in the book. He had Alabama, he had Ohio State, Auburn. He had like every school you could possibly want. It was once ranked like really highly in the 2024 class, but he dropped off a tad bit in that class. But Braden Lee, I think at the cornerback spot, I'm looking at him as a guy that is like next up. He reminds me a little bit of what Tarheeb still was a little bit. I think he kind of gives you a little bit of that Deontay Banks as well. I think he kind of finds his way in between there. I don't know if he can be the player that Deontay Banks was or Tarheeb still was, but I still think he's going to be a really good player for Maryland football, and we've done a really good job at guys in the secondary being building blocks for Maryland football and being really good players for Maryland football, and I think I'm looking at Braden Lee as a guy that I don't know if it happens this year, because I'm looking at a kid like Perry Fisher, Perry Fisher's interesting because I don't know if you would consider Perry Fisher a building block for Maryland football because of his, I guess you would. He's headed into his, he would be a redshirt he'll be a redshirt junior, next year. So you can kind of put Perry Fisher in that in between, because he's gonna be a redshirt junior. But I'll stick to Braden Lee, but Perry Fisher as well, just because of how he's supposed to start next year and how he's kind of blown up and burst onto the scene. So Perry Fisher as well at the cornerback spot. But maybe the building block of them all, Brandon Jacobs at the safety spot. He definitely takes over for Dante Trader and Glendon Miller next year. And I think we don't miss a beat with Brandon Jacobs. I think he's so talented. He might be the most talented safety that we've had in a while. And I really do mean that. I think Dante Trader's awesome. And I think that Bo Braid was a really good player. And if you got to go back a little bit, Nick Cross, who's in the NFL, got time with the Colts, was a starter a little bit for the Colts. So I think Brandon Jacobs has a chance to be really special, and he's a building block for sure for Maryland football that has a chance to be a really good player for Maryland football in the future. You're not really going to see it this year. That's the thing with a lot of these building blocks. Like I talked about with some of the younger guys like Braden Lee. I don't know if he plays a ton this year for us. I don't know how many of these guys will get time. I don't know if Brandon Jacobs will be able to get time at all. I don't know. I just don't know which of these players is going to be able to crack the lineup for the freshmen, but I do think that these guys are going to be really good. And then my last player is Michael Harris at linebacker. Hasn't played a ton either, but I think you'll see him at spots this year. And I saw him a couple times. He didn't play a lot because of how deep we were, but with losing Jayshawn Barham, and yes, we bring back everyone else in that room, but I do think that this kid, Michael Harris, was a really highly talented player, was a 4-star in the 2024 class or 2023 class, excuse me. And I think he has a chance to be a really good player. And I think he's a building block, but we'll see when it kind of comes into fruition for him. Maryland lacrosse loses in the national championship game today. I will talk about that right now. Also, Maryland lacrosse lost in the national championship today, which is an interesting kind of run for the Maryland lacrosse team. And a lot of people thought that they shouldn't have been in the tournament. They thought that they didn't deserve to be in the tournament. And I know a lot about lacrosse because I play myself at Boston University, Division I at Boston University. So I have a pretty good, probably even more than some of the other stuff, the football or basketball. I have a pretty good understanding of Maryland lacrosse's run to the national championship. And I think it's important to recognize that that was a pretty amazing run that they went on. First of all, because like every single game that they won was against a team that was favored against them. Even at home, first game against Princeton, they were the underdog. According, if you wanted to look at it, and I didn't really think that they should have been the underdog against Princeton, but I understood they were the underdog against Duke and UVA in the quarters and then on to the semifinals. But for them to win every single game up to the championship, to beat Princeton at home as the underdog, and Princeton had a really good young core, energetic, and they're going to be really good in the future. But I think for Maryland to beat that team, and then, okay, beating Princeton was like, okay, like, yeah, like you were at home. A lot of people would argue that Maryland should have won that game, even though they were the underdog. It wasn't anything crazy. But then beating Duke, that was when it took on another thing. Beating Duke in Long Island, like handling Duke, it wasn't really that close of a game. Handling Duke at Long Island is a pretty big deal to beat them that kind of easily, because Duke, of course, a lot of people would have told you Duke might have been the second best team in the country. They had the best player in all of lacrosse in Brennan O'Neill, who's one of the best players in the world, pro or college right now. And they kind of played him really well. And Maryland was down like 5-1 in the first quarter. So for them to come back and win that game, credit to Maryland for being able to do that. Credit to them to be able for winning that type of game, because you're not really supposed to win those type of games if you're the Maryland team, because you think of Maryland, yeah, you think of lacrosse a lot, but they were not that good this year. They lost 4 of their last 5, and you really could, I'm not going to lie to you, you could make an argument that they shouldn't have been in. But I think there's a difference between saying they shouldn't have been in and they're also a team that nobody would have wanted to see as well. I think there's a difference. You could make an argument that they shouldn't have been in, but I don't think you can make an argument that people would want to see that Maryland team if they did get in. And then beating UVA in the semis, another team that you're underdog to, one of the best teams in the country. UVA also has one of the best players in the country in Connor Schellenberger, and to beat them, it's a pretty big deal. And you get to the national championship game. And the interesting thing about Notre Dame is they have a couple of guys that you guys probably are maybe a little bit familiar with, but Notre Dame has 2 guys that are football players, that one is one of their starting wide receivers for their football team. And then as well as, if you guys remember, Tyler Buckner, who used to be the Notre Dame starting quarterback and then transferred to Alabama and things didn't go well. He's also on the Notre Dame lacrosse team, but Notre Dame was just exceptional this year. They were the best team in all of college lacrosse. And I think that was pretty obvious. And throughout the year, they lost 1 game. If they didn't lose that 1 game, they'd be they'd probably be considered one of the best all time, up with the Maryland team that won the national championship a couple of years ago. They'd probably be considered up with that team. But Notre Dame was definitely just a team a giant that really nobody could compete with and that nobody was going to beat. But the run that the Maryland Terrapins put on, the run that John Tillman, the head coach for Maryland lacrosse, was able to go on was a pretty cool little thing. And a lot of people think John Tillman's the best coach in college lacrosse, and I think I would agree. I think he's definitely one of the better coaches. I don't know if I would say the best, but he's definitely one of the better coaches in college lacrosse overall. So that's a pretty good deal for Maryland lacrosse to make it that far. And props to them, even though they got absolutely crushed by Notre Dame in the final. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked On Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked On Terps.